For me, the ongoing saga at Evergreen State College has been a perpetual sequence of okay buts. Okay, so an unruly band of dumb students is screaming at a professor for his objection to booting white people off campus for the day.
Would you like to hear the answer or not?
No!
Okay.
But I'm sure college administration will sort this silliness out. Okay, so the college president is some sort of scientific anomaly. A man who somehow manages to stand upright despite being born without a spine.
My name is George Bridges. I'm the 6th president of Evergreen State College. I use he, him pronouns.
But surely this ridiculousness will be short-lived, and soon cooler, more reasonable heads will prevail. Okay, so the world's least likely bully in a wheelchair is stalking and harassing an ironic Limp Bizkit fan chalk artist on campus.
Fuck you! Oh, please don't.
But surely there's something we can do to resolve this chaos. Short of a merciful precision nuke, right? I would gladly take Stimpy's leadership over George Bridges. Would have avoided a lot of unnecessaries and regrettables. If you missed any of these developments, I've done 2 previous in-depth videos on the events at the college. Check them out. They're linked in the description. I've endured the hours of cringe so that you don't have to. In the time since those events, Vice News visited the college and assembled a news segment in which George Bridges hesitated to deny being a white supremacist.
A student told me that you're a white supremacist.
I'm assuming that students have said lots of things about me. I don't believe I am. I'm
You
a
don't
white
believe
person.
you are, but you accept that you might be.
I'm a white person in a position of privilege.
Okay.
And the intersectional coup organizers condemned free speech.
We received a threat saying that people will come here and execute every single person they see on campus. At that point, fuck free speech.
When we're dead, when people die, and you're sitting here like, well, at least they got to practice their free speech. I'm so sorry about it. Your free speech is not more important than the lives of like Black, trans, femmes, and students on this campus. I'm so sorry. Hate to break it to you.
And advocated for the exile of Professor Bret Weinstein.
I don't care what happens to Bret anymore. He can go and be racist and be a piece of shit wherever he wants to do that. Hopefully, long term, we can just weed out people like Bret.
We want to weed out people like Bret, says the Aryan about the Jewish intellectual. How very anti-Nazi of you. So why am I returning to this story? Well, because there was only one okay but left before we reached the top of the chain of command. Last week was the first regular on-campus meeting of the school's Board of Trustees since the outbreak of the chaos, with time available for public comment. And this meeting was exactly like the rest of this story. Just when you think all the crazy and cringe has been wringed out, give it a good squeeze. There are several more drops, but as with the rest of this story, there are a few sporadic moments of optimism as well, a few diamonds of wisdom and sanity in the regressive rough, and it is on those points that I want to begin. Well, actually, in the Evergreen tradition, as we've seen George Bridges do previously, we must begin with the first speaker acknowledging the stolen land on which the college sits.
Good morning. I want to acknowledge the indigenous people of the Medicine Creek Treaty, whose land was stolen and on which the college stands. The Squaxin people, who are the traditional custodians of this land, and pay respect to elders past and present of the Squaxin Island tribe and other native people present.
If you added up all the time they spend reciting their cult phrase of Indian tribe acknowledgement, they'd probably have enough to develop a time machine and go back and fix the past they hate so much. Or at least learn enough math and science in the process to get a real job. But before we get lost in the nonsense, thankfully, yes, that is a looming Professor Bret Weinstein you can see in the background darkness. And yes, he was one of the voices of sanity to speak to the trustees at this meeting. He begins his commentary by noting that because the trustees have ignored his request to speak privately, this public forum is his only opportunity to offer his thoughts to them.
You probably all know that I've tried to reach the board privately so that I could discuss what I believe I know has taken place on this campus with you, not in a public forum, and that has come to nothing, so I find myself talking to you here.
Apparently the trustees don't have ears to hear his requests, which raises the next logical question: do they have eyes?
I'm told and I believe that you are all well-intentioned and that you have the best interests of the institution at heart. And the problem is that knowing that about you, and knowing what I do about what's taken place here, I'm forced to conclude that you must not fully understand what has happened, because if you did fully understand what has happened, you would be forced to act in the interest of Evergreen. I want to just simply pose some questions to you about things that I think you need to know that perhaps you don't. Do you know that the college descended into literal anarchy, and that for days the campus was not under the control of the state? It was under the control of protesters. That there were assaults, there were batteries, there was pressure not to report crimes to the police. People were, by the legal definition, I believe, kidnapped and imprisoned. That included faculty members and administrators. Others were hunted on the campus.
As he says, Weinstein's pointed questions are delivered because he accepts the premise that the trustees are well-intentioned and have the college's best interests at heart. But based on their refusal to speak with him upon request and their apparent concern only for a small segment of the student population, I'm not sure he should accept that premise. I think the more likely explanation is the trustees have seen exactly what is happening, and they like it. Intellectual misfits be damned. The trouble is, I suspect most Evergreen students might fit that description. Out of only 3 students to speak at this meeting, 2 of them were such misfits, and they spoke to the trustees' perceived commitment only to students who fit the ideological mold.
There has been a lack of anything that is demonstrable to the community, the college, and the nation as a whole of any action being taken by Evergreen except to placate a limited part of a limited side of one single political spectrum. Quite frankly, I have been cringing during this whole time. You guys hired a marketing firm. I likened it to hiring a propaganda firm. There needs to be a much more visible set of leadership and communication rather than essentially being silent and letting everybody else speak for the college instead of letting the college speak for itself and doing its job.
Which is one of my biggest concerns, that if you have offer any sort of alternative viewpoint, which I do have, and you're kind of the enemy. I have been to several meetings to speak. I've been told several times that I'm not allowed to speak because I'm white. This school seems to focus so much on race that is actually becoming more racist. Because I choose not to focus on race, I have actually been labeled a racist and a white supremacist. And if anyone took the time to actually know me, it's not true at all.
These are the people for whom I feel most sorry in this entire disaster. Evergreen is one of 6 public universities in Washington, and the one with the lowest admission standards, and therefore the highest acceptance rate, 97%. So while that means Evergreen's door is wide open to degenerates who are clearly accepting the invite, it also means Evergreen is a place for deserving students who might not get a shot elsewhere. And if I were one of those students, I would be enraged that all I want to do is go to class and work hard and make something of myself with the opportunity that I have. And now my degree is tarnished by association with this freak show. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like college leadership will do them any favors. The rest of the speakers were alumni and faculty. We'll start with the alumni first, who kept the focus on the real victims of what sounds like some sort of ongoing genocide, though I've seen no news coverage to confirm.
As a queer woman, I grew up in rural Texas, and Evergreen was my safe place all during high school as I waited to finally get here. But for many students, this is not a safe place, especially for students, staff, and faculty of color.
Evergreen is not a safe space for people of color, even though it accepts them indiscriminately and allows them to do whatever they want, up to and including suspending law enforcement so that they may break the law if they'd like to. How do you bend over any further when your face is already scraping the ground?
Do not spend any institutional resources, money, or time on punitive actions against student protesters, staff, and faculty. Protests are to Evergreen what football is to WSU. It's not going anywhere, and protests are part of our fabric. Protesting as a student was part of my educational experience. I wish I had at least 2 credits in it.
Protesting is to Evergreen what football is to Washington State. And Evergreen is to Washington State what homelessness and unemployment are to the riches and prosperity of the NFL. Hard work and talent gets rewarded. Bitching and moaning doesn't. But by all means, Evergreen, start a varsity protest team. I'm sure that will fill the seats of your stadium in this moronic simile, just like Washington State.
I challenge all of us, you and everyone in this room and beyond, to think about what it will look like to center people of color in our lives, in our community, and what it will look like
that we all gain by centering their experience and their pain. I ask us to ask ourselves these questions. Am I centering whiteness, or am I centering the people of color that I care about so deeply in my life?
How about centering neither? How about not centering anything around race? As I thought we all agreed, we don't judge the quality of an idea based on the speaker's race. We don't judge the character of an individual based on that person's color. How about we center good ideas? How about we center good values? Or at the very least, how about we center not tearing up while treating minorities like a helpless underclass? If you really want to eliminate bigotry, the bigotry of low expectations is a great starting point. But I guess I'm the one who doesn't get it, because another alum praises her and throws Bret Weinstein under the bus.
I don't think I could say anything better than what Miss Gus said, and you said it so well. I just couldn't say it any better. I watched the video of Professor Weinstein, like a lot of people did, talking to the students. And what he said is that what they were doing would only create a temporary reversal of fortune. And those are his exact words. And I feel like it'd be good for him to stay here and learn what can really happen with change, because he's got a long ways to go. And I understand that this is all about whether or not he's really a good fit for this campus. He said he's been teaching for 15 years that racism is in our genes. I'm not sure how people of color feel about sitting in a classroom and being told that.
I'm not sure how people of color feel about you treating them as an ideological monolith, or by you assigning them opinions based on their skin color because of how not racist you are, or by having a case for them made in a parody voice of an insufferably boring, monotone NPR story.
Those are the things that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And they clap. She says Bret Weinstein isn't a good fit for this college because he doesn't want to judge people based on skin color, and they clap. And I know that's only a drop of crazy in this insanity ocean, but I want to emphasize the fact that at this college, they say Bret Weinstein, a self-described deeply progressive person, has a long way to go, and they clap. And if that's not enough demonstration of hopelessness, we next hear from actual educators at the college, the faculty, partially responsible for creating and sustaining this intellectual infection.
As I've said to innumerable friends in our community, of course this happened at Evergreen, a place where every day students are learning to use their voices to affect change. What happened is also an expression of the leadership of President Bridges, demonstrated from the moment he took the stage at commencement to declare that we were going to address racial equity on our campus. Finally, moving forward, it is critical that we all, including the board, I submit, thoughtfully and strategically choose the narratives that we tell about what happened. We are now in the time of sense-making. It was wildly frustrating to live this story from the inside while reading and watching the bizarre alternative universe being described by the media.
So in this professor's view, these were heroic actions for which Evergreen should be proud. George Bridges showed strong leadership, and external backlash is due to bizarre, unfair media coverage. Except hardly any mainstream media covered this story, and none of us are relying on mainstream media portrayals to form our opinions. We are relying on the hours and hours of available unedited footage that effectively make us all firsthand witnesses. The backlash isn't because of unfair media presentation. The backlash is because you're a cult. And a second professor said the exact same thing. Evergreen isn't being criticized because of its absurdity. Evergreen is being criticized because that's the natural consequence of being progressive heroes.
I think we should all be aware of how higher education, liberal arts higher education in particular, is being targeted by the far right nationally, and how inevitably Evergreen would be set in the sights of movements like that. And to not forget, in the media coverage and what the Board of Trustees is saying, is that we were threatened with a massacre, a school shooting on campus by the far right. Fear makes people do things that they regret later, perhaps. Suspension is not going to change that. Lessening the level of fear and heightening the level of inclusion will lessen
for future confrontations.
It is true that Evergreen was threatened with a shooting via 911. It shut down campus for a few days, but that threat came well after this whole fiasco was already underway. Bret Weinstein's class was disrupted on May 23rd. The rest of the viral nonsense came in the following days. The threat that shut down campus came a week later, on June 1st. That doesn't justify the threat, of course, and it's a good thing that person is facing charges. But in no way can you blame the indefensible actions of the students and administrators on the threat. They were not reacting to the threat. The threat was reacting to them.
I think there's also an ideological message that we heard earlier, that we've heard from both Bret Weinstein, from Michael Zimmerman, and that is that identity politics is somehow the new enemy that divides people, and that we should set aside race, not deal so much with race. And I think we should keep in mind that there's not a contradiction between identity politics and focusing on issues like race and gender and unifying people around their common goals. The perspective of Bret Weinstein that we should somehow narrow our focus and not include so much about some issues, that's something that liberal arts would never do. They would never set aside anything.
You know, I've never smoked a cigarette in my entire life, but listening to this guy gives me the itch. Both because it might calm my internal rage a bit, but also because it'll get me off this planet a little quicker. There's no contradiction between identity politics and unity. Yes, there is. You are forming lines of division and assigning different rules based on those lines of division, which is inherently contrary to unity. And this idiotic sophistry that Bret Weinstein is narrowly focused because he excludes race when judging people as a general rule. That is not narrow focus, that is focus on what matters analytically. This guy teaches geography, and I bet if I told him to consider the role that Bigfoot and unicorns played in shaping the landscape, he'd say that's dumb and irrelevant. And if I said, well, the liberal arts would never focus so narrowly, excluding valuable points of analysis, he'd call me a pseudo-intellectual jackass. And he'd be right. But you know what? All the Marxists you can seclude on a college campus safe space can't stop the forces of the market. Forces far fiercer than a baseball bat and every feeble, emasculated arm you can assemble. College president George Bridges tells the Olympian that next year's enrollment has seen a, quote, slight decline as a result of the circus. No one has personally told him they're not coming back, but why would they? It's not like they're friends with George.
No, fuck you, George. We don't want to hear a goddamn thing you have to say.
Still, staff are calling some 1,200 students who are admitted and have not yet enrolled, as well as ongoing students who have yet to register for fall classes. Let's be clear, at a school of only 4,000 students, calling 1,200 about uncertainty of enrollment is not indicative of a slight decline. That's a potential forthcoming ghost town. And to those students, I sympathize with your position. To have your education hijacked by a cult that seeks to indoctrinate you into its ranks. I'd be mad too. But from afar, it looks like the best thing you can do for yourself is to hit the ignore button when that call comes. Better yet, hit the block button. This isn't a school that will empower you with the skill of critical and original thought. It's a place that will make you a bitter, hateful victim under intellectual restrictions that will hinder you from reaching your true potential. It's a shame that an Evergreen degree may now be a liability on a resume instead of an asset. But if I were hiring, and maybe someday I will be, God knows I need an intern slave around here. If I were hiring, and I saw Evergreen Transfer 2017 on the resume, I know I've got someone with the right idea. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. When life gives you an indoctrination camp, they make Kool-Aid, and you get the hell out of there. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.